Hi, AP Psych class. This is Mrs. Berkebile. Sorry I can't join you in person, but Mr. Shue invited me to make a screencast of some of the information I normally share when I come in to talk to his classes around this time of year. The image you're looking at right now is from the National Geographic special issue on gender and sexual orientation. I start with this because these individuals were profiled in the magazine, and of course, we don't have time to tell all of their stories today. But I think it's really important to remember that each of them does have a story, no matter how they identify their gender identity, their sexuality. They're each a person worthy of respect and decency. And whether we know the full story or not, I think it's really important to begin with this, with respect. This topic can be difficult for some people. It's some new ideas, a different way of thinking. It can challenge some previously held beliefs. And it's okay to say, this confuses me a little bit. I might need some time to think about this. But remember that if you meet an individual, really, no matter whether you fully understand or can empathize with them, they're still worthy of your respect and kindness. When I come in, I usually kind of review some of the things you've been talking about in class, including the difference between gender identity and expression, the difference between gender expression and sexuality or biological sex. I know Mr. Shue goes over all of this, and that's some important stuff to understand the differences between what these things really are. But I'm not going to take time to kind of rehash that with you today. I am going to go straight to some of my favorite examples of how gender expression changes over time, because gender is a construct in some ways. The time and place in which you live has certain ideas about what's quote unquote normal. So take this picture, for example, this young child with looks like blonde, sort of curly, mid-length hair, fluffy white dress, nice hat with a feather and a bow, shiny shoes with some straps. Given our current standards for gender, a lot of what we see here would make us think that this is a young girl. But the truth is, this is a picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR as a child. But in the time and place that he grew up, men and women dressed their children pretty much the same. Whether you were a male child or a female child, until about the age of 7, this was the norm. Frilly hats, frilly dresses, shiny shoes, long hair. That was considered appropriate attire for both young boys and young girls. That time and that place had certain rules about what was acceptable, and over time we have somewhat changed those, and we wouldn't necessarily dress a young boy this way now. That's because culture has changed, and so therefore our ideas about gender have changed. Another example here is a quote on the left there from the 1918 Ladies' Home Journal magazine. It says there, "The generally accepted rule is pink for boys and blue for the girls. The reason is that pink, being a more decided and stronger color, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is a more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl." On the right-hand side, you see from a different culture, the Spanish culture has the matador. The matador is seen as the height of masculinity, and they often wear pink or sometimes red. But pink and red are both seen as extremely masculine colors in this culture. So these are both examples of this idea of color being associated with gender. We make it up. Depends when you were born, depends where you were born on the earth. Whether we decide pink or blue is for one gender or another is essentially created in a certain time and in a place. Even the idea that there are just two genders, there are certain cultures and certain portions of history where that hasn't necessarily been the case. This is the time where sometimes people get really surprised. This is an image of a third gender that is part of the American Samoan culture. American Samoa is an island in the Pacific, I believe. And in their culture, historically, throughout their history, they have 3 genders. They have a word for what we would consider traditional male in our culture, and also traditional female. And they have this third gender, which does not have a word that translates in our language. In their language, it's fa'afin. I'm sure I'm not quite pronouncing that right. But this third gender is what in our traditional culture we might say are biologically male, but with more feminine gender expression. But again, those are just the words we need to use to try to understand it. In their culture, they're just fa'afin. That's just who they are. They're not outcasts. They're not considered to be less than. They are a smaller minority in the population, but that doesn't mean that they're less so. or less important, excuse me. They are just seen as a legitimate, gender that some people identify with. Similarly, in many Native American cultures, historically, there were three genders, sometimes even four or five. Again, their language reveals that they had words for certain genders that we just don't currently identify with in modern day English. This individual was what was known as a two-spirit. That's how it would sort of translate into modern English. A two-spirit was seen as, in some ways, both male and female. They embodied all the best characteristics of both men and women in one human body. Two spirits were not outcasts. They were not seen as an anomaly. They were, in fact, considered to be quite wise and very spiritual, and they were looked up to in the tribe. So this is yet another example of a different culture at a different time who considered there to be more than just the two binary genders that we might be considering. In modern day American culture, individuals who are battling against this sort of binary male-female or the sex they were assigned at birth, we often use the word transgender for those individuals. And I've personally worked with quite a few transgender students over the years, and I know that in modern American culture, this is a very difficult position to be in. I have a few statistics for you. These are from a 2015 survey of transgender individuals. And they reported, those that responded to the survey reported 29% of those individuals were living in poverty. That's more than twice the general population, which has about 14% considered below the poverty line. 30% of those individuals who responded and that identified as transgender had been homeless at some point in their life. 30% had been fired or denied a promotion or experienced some kind of mistreatment in the workplace. 31% experienced mistreatment in public settings, including 14% who were denied services, 24% verbally harassed, 2% physically attacked because they were identifying as transgender. And this bottom one here is, I think, the most frightening and harrowing. 40% of the respondents to the survey had attempted suicide in their lifetime, which is nearly 9 times the suicide rate of the United States at large. If nothing else, these statistics hopefully can show you that individuals who identify as transgender are going through an incredibly difficult emotionally and mentally, an incredibly difficult time mentally and emotionally. They are struggling. I know here at school as a counselor, when we meet with students who are questioning and have issues around either sexuality or gender, we're very aware that depression and suicidal ideation, anxiety, eating disorders, even dropping out are real risk factors for these young people. And so we continue to educate ourselves and work to support students who are going through either a transgender transition or just uncertainty. It's very, very important for me. I go back to that image of the 20 or so people from the beginning. Very important for us all to remember, hi guys, to remember that people are at the heart of this discussion. As we learn about what gender is and what sexuality is, as we try to educate ourselves and better understand, we are always talking about people at the heart of it. And so I hope we can always remember that. I really blew through what I normally talk about. If you have questions about this, or if you want to talk more, always come down and see us in the counseling office, and maybe I'll be able to stop by your class and say hey, and see if anybody has any questions. I usually get to tell a few more stories about my experiences too, so sorry I didn't get to do that, but thanks for letting me pop in.